All right, good intro. So yeah, I think the flyer says revolutionizing financial services. I started with this slide because I think by now everybody in this room is probably already their minds blown by blockchain. So I don't think we have to necessarily explain what blockchain is. So I just wanted to talk about something else. And what I want to talk about today is very much in line with what the question that we've been wondering ourselves for quite some time, which is, if I can go to the next slide, how do we get to a larger user group around the world that is using cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology? So this is the technology adoption life cycle, the innovators that move to the early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards. Right now we are around 2.9 to 5.8 million users globally that is using Bitcoin, which is, all things considered, not a lot of people. And that is a bit of a problem. So this was a University of Cambridge research that I can highly recommend you Google. There's tons of interesting data in it, and they calculated these numbers. So let's see where we need to go. Obviously, to be in the early adopter stage, if we believe that cryptocurrency can become, let's say, a global reserve currency, we need to be seeing the early adopter stage as 100 million, and then maybe early majority as 500 million users. So we're nowhere near this. So why is that so? If we look at the growth rates of social networks today, they go much faster than what Bitcoin or any of the other cryptocurrencies have experienced so far. So this is comparing Skype with Twitter, Gmail, Facebook, and WhatsApp from inception or launch of the product to the adoption curve of the different products. So you see within 4 years, WhatsApp was able to reach over 400 million users worldwide. Now Bitcoin was released its Genesis block in 2009. So definitely there's something different going on with cryptocurrency technology and adoption than with the social network that we have here on this list. So to start my point that I'm going to make today, I want to talk about public perception. Which I think has quite a bit to do with why we're seeing this adoption curve. So if we go back in time from when I started in 2013, we go a little bit further back. So 2009 it was invented, the Genesis block, and essentially there was no public perception. The only ones who were using Bitcoin were the cyberpunks that were working in the forum to look at what Bitcoin is and experiment with it. And it's only to 2013 when probably a lot of you got involved. So who is here in the market since 2009? Anyone? Right, so no one in this room. 2010? One, yeah, there's a couple of hands. 2011? See, 2012? And then 2013. All right, 2014. We'll just keep going. All right, but 2013 was sort of the breakthrough moment for Bitcoin, where it caught the headlines of this weird little digital currency that suddenly became so valuable, and it attracted a lot of speculation. And then right after 2014, Mt. Gox went bankrupt, and we get to the phase that I like to call the Bitcoin bad phase. As a Bitcoin broker, one of the European leading ones, we've been plagued by this phase for quite some time now, trying to establish banking relationships. And I think anyone have had a cryptocurrency business or still running a cryptocurrency business can tell you the same, that 2014 was not an easy year to get anything done. And because of that, we started to see the emergence of a new narrative that had to be shaped in order to do work with the financial institutions and also to let the startups differentiate themselves against this Bitcoin bad phase. So that's where the blockchain good narrative emerged, which is 2015. And we suddenly see all these different types of startups that are moving away from cryptocurrencies and are now only talking about the underlying technology, blockchain, even though, of course, Bitcoin is the largest production blockchain in the world still today. And the second larger one is Ethereum, which is also a permissionless blockchain. So what we're seeing now, so we're in 2000, we founded the company in 2013, and we're now in 2017, is that by the end of 2016, we saw in terms of the hype, blockchain died down a little bit within the financial institutions, and we saw the financial institutions almost going full circle, where suddenly the realization was there that, okay, maybe cryptocurrencies isn't all bad. You have central banks around the world exploring the creation of their own cryptocurrency. In the Nordics, you have the e-krona announced by the Swedish Riksbanken, where they're having a serious budget and a project plan to explore that. So we've gone almost full circle. And I think Andreas Antonopoulos also definitely went in that line. But interestingly enough, in my role as CEO of Safello, I've been talking to quite a few banks. And within the banks, we're meeting a lot of people as well that understand that it's not only the intranet of blockchains that can do a lot of good for efficiency, but there's also something about this weird little cryptocurrency that might have an impact on our business. So then we go to 2017, and this is my proposal for the community to make that the year of the narrative, which I think is where we need to be going. So to illustrate that, this is, in my view, still how the average population sees Bitcoin. For speculative purposes, a get-rich-quick scheme. It's quite nerdy. It's like, oh, if you know anyone in your close circle, they either want to get rich or they're your nephew that is quite tech savvy and bought some bitcoins. And then you have, especially in the Nordic media, there was a research done by the Stockholm School of Economics, where they actually compared media articles between, let's say, the US, Britain, and Nordics, where there was a real emphasis about the negative and nefarious aspects of Bitcoin versus the New York Times and some of the international outlets that were more focused on the potential for the technology. So this still persists very much in the Nordics, but I think in a wider sense around the world when it comes to the developed countries of what Bitcoin is and what it means. Of course, if you go to developing countries, then that narrative is very different from how we perceive it. And on the blockchain side, then the narrative is very technical, and it's very much about settlement, contracts, trades, insurance, ledgers, optimizing efficiency, and making what already exists better. But it's not so much about the real potential and the cool stuff that captures most of the people that I know in our industry attention, and why they got into the cryptocurrency blockchain market in the first place. So there we go to my narrative one. What I believe that it should be about is about the real implications, the real use cases, the revolutionary aspect. There are some real revolutionary things about the technology and the impact it could bring if you look at the global financial system. It's been said many times, but the billions of people that are unbanked or underbanked. This narrative of the next internet and this comparison I like a lot, and that analogy, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences, but in general I like the idea that we're moving from the internet that's all about information to the internet of value. The other point being doing good, I will go into an example of that. The same with sustainability. Of course, Bitcoin, sustainability, people are talking about the large mining operations in China and Asia that are everything but sustainable. Whereas, of course, the technology itself can lead to a sustainable world if we look at improving the way corporations are being transparent about their processes and tying that to a blockchain. So some of the trade finance cases and supply chain cases and provenance cases can definitely be on the sustainable side. How we deal with the mining operations and the footprint, the carbon footprint there, that's of course a different question. And the last one, and the most important one, in my opinion, is the fun side of things. If I look at, so this is my next slide, and I think this is an example. So I went this morning on, this is my big, we don't need solutions, but we need stories. And then if we look at the stories that are out there today, I obviously went to all of our favorite websites, Bitcoin Reddit. And the majority of stories here is about the scaling issue, right? We're now 2 years later when the first scaling issue started to emerge in discussion. And now it's still dominating. So we're talking about BU, we're talking about UASF, and we're talking here about BTU failure. So it's not about the promise of Bitcoin. So I tried to be neutral. I also got the BTC Reddit, similar picture. And then I said, okay, let's be totally fair and go to Ethereum and see what's going on there. And there, at least, there was one article that caught my attention, which was the UN wants to adopt Bitcoin and Ethereum, which I think is a great case. And it's actually an interesting one to highlight, and in a way of phrasing narratives around what blockchain can do and how you can look at highlighting the use cases with that narrative in mind. So to give you an example, and I have a couple of examples of how you can start thinking about phrasing either your product, your company, or the technology as such in a different light that can be more compelling to your audience. And one of them that I wanted to highlight is sustainability, but then particularly the UN goals. So this is the development goals for the UN until the year 2030. And you have no poverty, no hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, clean water. I don't have to list them all, but I highlighted a couple of them. So that's no poverty, good jobs and economic growth, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, responsible consumption. Right, so these are goals formulated by the UN that I think a lot of the companies can build narratives around. And that goes into the product as well as in how you talk to the media. And we need that positive image, I think, to get through the next phase to adoption, to make people understand what this is all about and to help them start using it. So to give an example how Safello used this practically in the product, so in 2014, I think it was, we launched this platform, which was donation pages, where we partnered up with 3 different charities that we created donation pages for, where they can directly receive Bitcoin donations, and then they could convert those to regular currency, or they can use the Bitcoins to help the charity. So in this case, it's Schuil, it's a Swedish organization that does child vaccination in Africa. And it was, obviously a good story because it was the lowest denominator that people couldn't really hate on when we're talking about cryptocurrency. And when we went into the Techstars Accelerator in London, we took that narrative where we initially tried to get bank accounts, which was an impossible mission, a whole different story, getting bank accounts from large banks. But by clinging on this particular narrative and the product that we already had, we were then able to do a globally unique deal around Bitcoin. And it was partnering up with Venture for America, where we created a donation page for them. And then we started looking at the reconciliation piece on the back end of that. And we wrote a white paper for that as well. So it is about creating that narrative that then opens up doors. One example. So the last slides are just more inspirational. I don't know how much time I've left. So another thing, a way to think about not only looking at what kind of products you want to develop, but also, again, the narrative, is looking what other emerging technologies are there, and what combination of these technologies can lead to interesting products and interesting ideas. So this is the Gartner hype cycle. Probably blockchain is on there. Yeah, blockchain is there's blockchain, obviously on the peak of the hype cycle. So this was 2016, and I think it's now on its way out. And that's what I meant with the timeline that we saw in the beginning. But if you think of blockchain and then some of the other technologies, okay, what is blockchain in combination with virtual personal assistants? What is blockchain with augmented reality, virtual reality? And I think, I don't know the answers to what those products might look like or what the stories behind those products would look like, but it's another way to look at it. Got 2 more. And that's about the Bitcoin definition. So this is, again, from a talking point of view. The definition of Bitcoin has been very cluttered. And the reason why people think Bitcoin is bad, and therefore everything that is cryptocurrency is bad, because they don't necessarily understand what Bitcoin is. So what I found was very helpful in talking to financial institutions and consumers is to separate the different definitions of blockchain into 4 separate parts. Some of you might disagree with this, but one of them is the protocol. So this is what you would typically refer to as blockchain. Then the other is the cash element. So this is using Bitcoin as a currency, which is whole different use cases and different stories. Then it's the digital gold. It's a means to save money, to speculate in. So I think this, in practice, this makes up probably 90% of our market today. And in order to change that, we need to build more use cases and narratives around these other definitions. And the last one is the token. I like to call it the tokens. we're thinking about smart contracts and all the applications of blockchain in a wider sense. So 4 definitions and many stories to tell around those. And I'd like to finish off with an example. I don't want to show myself, but just for the reference, this is me. I did a TEDx talk where I talked about essentially storing money in your brain. And for me, it was sort of a conceptual, interesting idea that having a private key and a public key and storing the hash in the word combination to unlock the money in your brain, you could, in a war situation, move from country A to B and maintain your wealth, so you don't have to carry, I don't know, the gold. And for me, it was sort of an interesting, fun idea that someone at some point might do, until somebody commented on Reddit, and they said that I actually drove to the GDPR militant checkpoint with funds well encrypted on my cloud account. So these are what I like to call the human interest stories. Like, find people around the world that have something to tell, that actually are using it. Like, another great article that I read was how people in Venezuela are actually buying goods from the United States using Bitcoin because their currency is completely inflated. So there are these stories, but they're not really told in the right way to get a wider audience captured. Not saying that this will necessarily help with the adoption. I think ultimately we need to build a social fabric into all the products that we're building. That's the only way those products that I showed on the second slide, why they're growing so fast. But to summarize for some of the inspiration, I list sustainability, emerging technologies, the definitions of Bitcoin, and human interest. And that's it. And I have one small announcement around Safello. For everybody who's Norwegian, there was a VAT case in Norway where you couldn't buy Bitcoins because they were taxing the actual Bitcoins. That was lifted in the early January, I think. And Safello today is launching Norwegian kroner buying through bank transfers. So if you go to our website, you can start using it. Thank you. Questions? Time for questions? No? Any questions? Questions? No questions? One question.
Just a comment that the growth curve that you showed in the beginning,
Yeah.
is a good observation to be that the 4 first ones were desktop primarily, whereas that was mobile.
Was mobile first?
It was, yeah, more or less mobile only in the beginning.
Yeah.
They went later on to desktop.
So for someone who didn't, I'll repeat it for those that didn't hear, the WhatsApp case was interesting because it was mobile only, I think, in the beginning. So that was one of the reasons. And of course, mobile first is now one of the most often strategies for launching your product. Good observation. Anyone else? No? Okay, thank you.